Me confused.
Okay, welcome to Positivity Bias. We're looking at chapter 10. Last session, we talked about Lashon Tov, saying good things, but this goes a little bit deeper because what we're talking about is the power of language itself. And we'll see that in the course of this chapter, it talks about in the Torah sense, language is critically important because language is the power of creation. That God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So the use of verbiage of words is behind the very basic of creation itself. Number one. Number two, even science has started bringing out that the words we use have an emotional impact on our brain. Part of it is self-fulfilling and the positive thinking. So in a classroom, I remember talking for years about kids live up to the expectations. So if you have high expectations, they did great. But if you have low expectations, then that's all they achieve, right? So the verbiage, the languaging that we use is critically important. And he begins here with, again, the stories of the examples from the Rebbe that we might have thought were minor nuances, but the Rebbe took those minor nuances of language very, very seriously. And we starts with the story about J.J. Hecht. Now, J.J. Hecht was a famous American rabbi who was very close to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And when we had rallies, when we had Lag BaOmer rallies, parades in New York during the Rebbe's lifetime, anytime Lag BaOmer would fall on a Sunday, there would be a massive parade in New York with floats, and they shut down Eastern Parkway, and it was massive. Military was involved, police were involved. It was just a huge, massive. People came from the whole tri-state area to participate, so thousands of people. J.J. Hecht was asked to be the official MC and to be the Rebbe's translator. So the Rebbe would speak, and then he would give a review of what the Rebbe just said, and he'd do it in English because the Rebbe spoke in Yiddish to the crowd. So he was very worried. Rabbi Hecht was very worried about how everything was going to play out. And he was seeing all the flaws in each of the parade, floats, and he was seeing all the challenges. It was all the negative stuff. And when the Rebbe walked out and started delivering a discourse to the children and saluting the soldiers who were in the parade and admiring the well-prepared floats, seeing all the good things in it, right? So Rabbi Hecht, he changed himself. It uplifted him. It changed him. He was, very, very positive. So after the parade was all over, he asked the Rebbe, did you enjoy it? The Rebbe said, very much. And Rabbi Hecht then expressed hakaras hatov, thank you to the Rebbe for the favor he had done for him personally, and he described it as arosh geschleppt, that he dragged him out of his negative perspective. And the Rebbe, pulled him out of it, right? And the Rebbe raised his hand and surprised and said, "Euch geschleppt, euch geheben, euch geheben, lifted up." What's the difference? Euch geschleppt means that you were in a negative mental space, and someone dragged you out, right? Whereas euch geheben means uplifted, means you were already in a good spot, but went higher from there. So even that minor nuance of language is to focus on, again, the positivity, right? To make sure that we're expressing things in words that were more powerful, more positive, right? Having that heightened sensitivity. Mm-hmm. And this has been a part of Torah text, Gemara and Talmud, for all this time. It's part of the way of Jewish teaching to begin with, but the nuancing to which the Rebbe took it really was very much a change. There's a story here about talks about MRI scans and science that have watched neurological develops them and neurological changes based on languaging. I have a friend who he has 2 degrees from MIT, one in engineering. Actually, it was 3 degrees. One was engineering, I forget the second one, but also one in what I would have thought was liberal arts. Who knew that MIT even had that subject, right? But he had seen a study where if you, I'm trying to remember the exact details of the study, but it was basically, it came down to labeling the bottles with positive late words, and that actually making a change in the growth of the plants that were watered with the bottle. It's some, far out stuff, right? But it was fascinating to see that level of it. I only remember that because he started posting on his water bottles. He would say, he would put positive Hebrew phrases on his water bottles from that point on. But it's a very important thing. And I've seen in the medical field the same type of thing in the medical field where when the staff comes with a very positive perspective on things and a very positive attitude, outcomes are better. Literally, the outcomes for healing have been better because of the positive attitude. So, again, coming back to that, focus on the positivity, but the Rebbe's use of languaging, and that's what we were talking about in this chapter was focusing on languaging. So, common terms, colloquial phrases that we say, the Rebbe did not like the term a deadline, but rather he would use a due date. He wouldn't let it, he would change the phrasing. Don't use the common languaging that has a negative connotation. We would, when it came to a spiritual getaway, right? We wouldn't call it a retreat because that has a negative connotation of giving up. He would call it onward and upward. Again, minute changes, but at the same time changing the positivity. Parshas Metzora. Parshas Metzora means it's a skin affliction for someone who had sinned, and it's the divine guidance for help him to repent from his sins, right? But the Rebbe wouldn't call it Metzora. The Rebbe would refer to that parsha as Parshas Tahira, purification, because the Metzora who had sinned and has this disease would get purified to overcome it. So that would focus on the positive. He wouldn't even call the parsha Metzora, he would call it Parshas Tahara. Even the Baal Tshuva movement, Baal Tshuva means a master of return, a master of repentance, right? That connotation is then that there's something the person has to repent from. So he preferred not to use that type of terminology, but rather would focus on positive things. Australia was not a faraway land, but it was the opposite of close. And this also was a common thread. Someone is not well. One of the things that the Rebbe talked about was in Israel, a hospital was called a Beis Chaylim, a house of sick. And the Rebbe, said we need to call it Beis Refuah, a house of healing, because that's what it's about. That's what it's really for, right? We have to change the languaging. Even in Yiddish, a cemetery was always called a Beis HaChaim, the house of living. So the languaging has an impact. It has a very important part to it. When a man described himself as a small Jew in a letter to the Rebbe wrote back, there's no such thing as a small Jew, because every Jew has a soul within him, which is a chelik alikaim ma'amam, which is an actual part of God's infiniteness. There's no such thing as a small Jew. Cannot be. Nuances.
Well, maybe he's
right?
only 5 feet tall.
My sister is 4'12". She feels that sounds taller.
Yeah.
But that's the idea. It's silly in a sense, but at the same time, you're focusing on a positive piece to it, right? Finding a way to reference things that brings out the positive side, that brings out the goodness of it, right? The Rebbe used to be the editor before before the war, the Rebbe used to be the editor of a scholarly journal published by the yeshiva called Hatamim, which means the students, right? The holy students. But he would not refuse. He refused to use the way it was printed. Only the first page had a header, but the title, the top that runs across the top of the pages. But he refused to use the terminology of the other pages should be without a head. He wouldn't say that. He would say the first page should have the head. That's all he said. Only the first page should have the head. Would never say, no, that page shouldn't have a head. When doing a translation of the Tanya, Rabbi Nissim Mengel had referred to the fourth domain. In Torah, we talk about the speaking, the domain of the speaking, humankind, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and then the lowest one is translated as the inanimate. And the Rebbe said they should be referred, that in the translation should be referred to as the silent kingdom. It has a soul, but it remains silent. It has a godly spark in it, but it doesn't speak. It remains silent, right? And so when Rabbi Mengel was trying to be very correct because he's a very proper English type of thing, so he had written in the change, but he had written it in with, he removed so he had silent in brackets and inanimate was the primary word, right? And the Rebbe changed the brackets to be inanimate. So giving credit and acknowledgement for what is truly there, right? Not to negate what's there. And then of course we use we never say a person is sick, we say a person is not well, using the opposite phraseologies of it, right? One of the interesting discourses that Rebbe talked about was in Parshas Noah, in the Parsha of Noah, right? So it mentions there that there would be 7 of all the kosher animals and 2 of those animals that are not pure. The Torah says this, right? So the Rebbe asked a question. We have a policy that the Torah never adds unnecessary words. So just say it's tameh, it's impure. Why say it's not pure? They say it's tameh, it's impure, right? And the Rebbe brings a proof, and he says when we come to the laws of kosher, the Torah uses the word impure for those animals. So why in the Parsha of Noah does it refer to those animals as not by the word impure, but rather saying they're not tahor, they're not pure? Why the extra words? The Rebbe brings out the idea that when we're talking about Jewish law, we have to be very clear and we have to call it what it is. But when we're telling stories, when we're making reference to the animals that were only 2 that came into the ark, there's no law being referred to there. That we don't have to have the clarity. We have the space to be able to be more refined in our languaging and say it's not tahor rather than call it tomei. Call it not pure as opposed to being pure. We'll add the extra words in deference to the sanctity and the holiness of the animals themselves, even those that are not pure, but we won't call them tomei if we don't have to. Being careful about the languaging that we use, the words that we use, to make sure that we're giving the best foot forward. I'm sure you're all familiar with the old song, the Maimonides 13 articles of faith, and one of it is that I believe in the coming of Mashiach. And one of the songs that's always been sung was Ani Mamin, Ani Mamin. And so there's a song to that, and it's a well-known song. But in the song it says, even though Mashiach may tarry, he may delay, nevertheless, we believe in Mashiach's coming. Though he may tarry, those words that Rebbe never said. Would not give the option for Mashiach to wait any longer, would not even you say those words. We believe in Mashiach. We believe in Mashiach. And he shouldn't tarry. So this idea of always referring to things in the most positive fashion possible, trying to find our verbiage that's better, best foot forward type of things. My question as we round up the class here is how can we implement this in our day-to-day lives? Where can we find use, an opportunity to change the way we speak, to bring out the positive, to shine a light on the good aspect of anything?
Sometimes that's a challenge.
A good place to start would be the way we speak of the Palestinians and the war that's going on in the Middle East. At least be neutral, or we always speak of them in a negative sense, which I don't think helps anything.
Well, they stop killing us. Maybe it'd be a little easier.
Well, sure it would.
But here's the point. The Rebbe, when speaking about the situation, would refer to military stuff as military stuff, but still talk about human beings that are created in the image of God, and as human beings deserve our respect.
That's right.
Now, that doesn't take away from the fact that using someone else as a human shield, using women and children in our hospitals as human shield, is horribly wrong. And those who would do such a thing have to accept the consequences as their responsibility, not trying to blame someone else.
Agree.
We're not changing that reality. But when I look back at the propaganda America used against our enemies during World War II,
Oh yeah,
there's no excuse for that. It's that itself is fear-mongering. There's enough horrific stuff that happened that can be shared as fact, but at the same time still honoring human beings, that they are creations of God. So point well taken. Point well taken. We need to be careful in our languaging, that even the enemy, whom it's very hard. So we talked about this the other day, about family coming forward, family of someone who was killed by friendly fire, and family coming forward to publicly say, we served, we understand the heat of the moment, we understand this, the mere seconds decisions have to be made, and we don't hold you accountable, we don't hold you to blame, we get it. Right? It would be so much easier to be silent. Even if you weren't going to scream, how about something happen? It would be so much easier to remain silent. But they didn't do that. They stepped forward to say, I know your pain, I get it, and I understand, and I don't hold you responsible for the loss. That's huge. Because those same people, those same soldiers, could be carrying around that burden for the rest of their lives, and I'm sure they will anyway. But to have the family of those who passed to be able to step forward and say, "Hey, we understand you," that's rachamim, that's mercy, that's huge, right?
Yep.
So yes, always looking for the nuances in languaging and the ways that we can come forward to make the world a better place through the words we use. Another example, anyone has something else that we can share?
Well, sometimes, and in the last class, we are tangentially making reference to the armies of the world, the young and stupid, i.e. at 18, when they're not quite fully developed, because you can tear them down and build them back up. Now, by like token, you talk about the verbiage that was used during, say, the World War by all the belligerents, really, but by the United States Army in particular. They did that on purpose because they did want to, as a matter of fact, dehumanize the enemy to make it easier for the young and stupid to go out there, putting their lives on the line and killing the other poor bastards.
Right.
You know, so sometimes that saves that serves the purpose, not necessarily a noble one, but in war you have to do everything you can to let the other poor bastard die, not you.
Quoting Patton.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I want you to go out. I don't want you to have to go out and die for your country. Your job is to make the other poor bastard
There you
go out
go.
and die for
Yep.
his country.
Yep.
Right. So that comes back to the ethics of war. So yes, by dehumanizing the enemy, the intention is to create a tactical support to the soldiers to be able to go out and do what's necessary to do.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
is there a consequence later on in life when a person reflects back to what happened in his wartime?
Yeah, these days we call it PTSD. In the old days, we called it shell shock and a number of other things. And again, here comes Patton with the slap in the face of that poor bastard in Sicily, So
Right.
yeah, it does have consequences. And like you said, this was an amazing story about the family of the friendly fire victims coming forward and trying to ease that burden for the people who actually were unlucky enough to have to do this, and they will in fact live with that for the rest of their lives. But I think it was a tremendously gracious effort on the part of the families.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wonder if in war ethics there's a place for not dehumanizing the enemy for the benefit of our soldiers, to be able to say, and I think that's, again, one of the, I know an active duty service member who chose his military occupational service specifically because it would not require carrying a weapon, because he doesn't trust the government to make a decision about who he needs to kill. He was very interested in getting involved in the Air Force pararescue jumpers because they're amazing special ops. They go in to save people, but they come in with machine guns blasting.
Yep.
So again, when we take a moral high ground, can we still empower our forces to do what's necessary for a war without dehumanizing the enemy?
That would be an experiment that, as a leader, I would be very hesitant to undertake, because that might cost the blood of my own people. So basically, this would be an experiment, and an experiment that cannot have a positive outcome. It would have a tragic outcome no matter what you do.
Cannot? I question that. I don't know if that is the inevitable result. Is the loss on our sides. I just don't know that would be the inevitable result.
Well, the closest we come to this proposition is basically the most ethical army on the face of the planet, which is the IDF. Okay, but there too, I mean, war is gruesome business. Let's face it.
Right, but at the same time, the IDF, I don't believe they dehumanize the people that are affected by the war, but rather just the terrorists themselves, and the fact that they have, by their actions, forfeited their own life.
Okay, just by calling an individual one of God's creatures and terrorist, you're already on the way to dehumanizing. It's the same thing. It's a label. Okay. And
It's-
what are you going to do? Are you going to deny they're terrorists? Are you going to they're fine, upstanding people, and we should just pat them on the back and give them a cookie and send them away?
So that's, and again, I'm going to put
It's a conundrum.
I'm going to put in a word in for this book that I was talking about before.
Got it already.
To win a war the Jewish way.
Yeah.
And I think this delves into this topic. I only read it once. I need to get back to it and review, but definitely a topic that needs to be reviewed and discussed, because how much. So I'm going to go back to the example we just said. When it comes to the story of Noah, we refer to the impure animals with the terminology of loy tahor, not pure, meaning that we're spending twice the amount of words to mention it. And yet, when it comes to the laws of kosher and what's kosher and not kosher, it uses the word tameh, impure, for that same animal. Why here is it okay and why there is it not okay? Because when it was Jewish law, you have to be very clear so someone doesn't make an error, a mistake. You have to be very clear about what you can and cannot do. But when we're talking about the story of the events, we have the space and the time to be able to be more refined. And that is my question, is that when it comes to war ethics, how much do we just have to say that the enemy is the enemy? The enemy is a negative term. But that is the reality, because that we need to know that with clarity. But how much further do we have to go to dehumanize them so it's theoretically easier for our soldier to do the work he has to do and actually, win a war and kill the people that have to be that we're fighting against? Do we have to dehumanize them? Or it makes it easier for him? Well, and the consequences later down the road, after 20, 30 years down, how does he feel about that? I wonder that question. I wonder if how much of our languaging is actually counterproductive for our people going to battle. And I wonder. I just question with that.